Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest on for the first time, Brady Holmer. If you aren't familiar with him, he has his master's degree in human performance from the University of Florida, and he currently works as a researcher at examine.com. He also has his email, Physiologically Speaking, which I think you put out something once a week on that, I believe, if not more. He lives in Austin, Texas with his wife, his son Lee, and their dog Bannister. So Brady, looking forward to chatting with you, man. Thanks for hopping on the podcast today.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks a lot for inviting me on. And I will make one correction. Maybe I have to update my bio somewhere, but I actually no longer work for examine.com. I used to work for them as a researcher, and I've moved on to a different role somewhere else now. But it's not your fault, definitely mine. I need to obviously update my bio on wherever that was on the
I
internet.
I apologize. I think it was
No,
your
no need.
website, and then I cross-referenced on Examine, and you were actually still there. So I tried to double check it, but that's good to know. I should have brought this up to you beforehand. If you don't mind me asking, what did you or where do you work at now, or yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I haven't actually kind of gone public with where I work now, and I'll
Oh,
probably just keep that
yep.
not necessarily like it's classified or anything, but just working for as like a content creator and a researcher currently. But in addition to that, doing my Substack and doing other content creation type stuff. So basically, I'm still in the field of doing scientific research, writing about science, scientific content creation, all sorts of things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, no, totally understand that. As far as Examine goes, was that like when you say researcher there, was that like you were just kind of like you would like look up research for them and like find research papers to kind of go over or
Yeah, essentially my role was just to kind of read research studies all day and summarize them, whether they were on supplements, diet, nutrition, exercise, kind of spanning the gamut of it. I'm not sure if you've used Examine at all
Mhm.
for, doing some of their content, but on Awesome Site, I still use it, even though I no longer work there. I'm still on good terms with the team. But yeah, I was just like reading studies all day, writing for them for Examine, and also updating kind of topic pages. So like every now and then we would do a huge update on, say, okay, it's time to look at all the research on magnesium since we haven't updated this page in 2 years. What does the research say? So I would also do page updates like that. And I really enjoyed it. Like, that's what I would do if I wasn't getting paid for it. So the fact that, that was like my full-time job was awesome. And I learned a lot about, supplements in the process, which was great. So it was an awesome role while I was there.
Awesome. As far as research goes, looking up, I saw you were involved with some research papers. Is that something that you still are actively involved in doing research, or is it more so just like kind of the reviewing of the research now at this point?
Yeah, now it's just the reviewing of it. So I'm more of like a research synthesizer now. I did do some research in undergrad, and then in grad school, I was actually involved in like clinical research. And so after I finished my master's, I'm not currently like affiliated with a university or anything and actively doing research. Something I would like to eventually do at some point, probably again. I mean, it's a lot of fun conducting kind of like clinical trials and doing research on exercise and things like that. It's certainly hard and a lot different than what I do now, but it's very rewarding, and being actively involved in science is kind of cool. But I think that experience, while I'm not doing it anymore, that experience allowed me to sort of understand how like science works, and
Yeah.
hopefully, I think at least, write about it a little bit better now that I'm out of it. So yeah, I don't currently do research. I'm more just synthesizing it and reading about it.
So as far as like that goes, is there, where do you typically find yourself kind of like what interests you the most with research? Is there any like particular topics that you find yourself kind of looking at the most or what does that typically look like?
Yeah, it's kind of a bunch of stuff. I would say like what I tend to focus on, just because it's what I'm most interested in, is exercise and cardiovascular health. In graduate school, I was part of a lab that was a cardiovascular physiology lab. So I just love reading science about like how exercise affects the heart, how exercise affects the blood vessels, things like VO2 max. That's kind of like my wheelhouse. It's where I'm, I guess, classically trained. Like that's what most of my education is in. So I really kind of gravitate towards that stuff. Exercise performance, endurance training. I also geek out about that, as well as like supplements and nutrition. So those are kind of the areas that I enjoy the most. But then really like over the past probably like 5 to 6 years, I've gotten really interested in reading about like longevity research. I think that stuff is fascinating too. Like whether it's, drugs to enhance longevity or just like interventions like exercise that improve it. I'm really interested in that as well. So those are kind of the two main things. But I also like reading about supplements. Always fun and a very popular topic as well, because that can be pretty controversial.
If you kind of mentioned, hey, potentially down the line, getting back into doing some research, is there anything where you would like specifically want to kind of dive into with that?
Yeah, I think going and doing like nutrition related to endurance exercise performance would kind of be fun. I never did a lot related to nutrition. It was more so like, if you do exercise training, how does that affect like your heart health, your blood vessel health, and things like that? I would love to look at nutrition as it specifically relates to trained athletes and endurance exercise performance and kind of like optimizing strategies around that. I think that would be super fun. So that's probably what I would choose to do, or something related to sleep. I also am kind of interested in that.
Yeah, no, sleep is super interesting. Would the sleep just be like sleep kind of quality for like performance based type stuff, or is there any kind of like area that you would want to dive into with that?
Yeah, I think one of the projects that I was involved in during graduate school that never turned into like a large major project was like we looked at how sleep deprivation affected blood vessel function, something we call endothelial function. And I would kind of like to return to doing something on that. So like how sleep loss affects the heart, or how inconsistent like sleep patterns can affect heart health. That's really interesting to me. It's interesting because like you know, sleep is almost like talked about so much now. I'm trying to find different ways to talk about it because I'm like, at this point, like it's 2024, everybody knows, okay, sleep 7 to 9 hours per night. It's like, I think we should be done almost talking about the importance of sleep, but there are kind of new avenues regarding sleep that are like looking at circadian biology and looking at how, if your sleep schedules are more consistent, how does that affect your health? So that I think to me is more interesting than, oh, just sleep 8 hours a night. If you don't sleep enough, it's bad. We know that if you sleep enough, that's good. So, like, what else can we look at? I think I would like to look at things related to circadian biology and maybe that how that affects heart health.
Well, kind of like you said there, it sounds like almost again like more the sleep quality. Like, hey, what are the things that we're doing to actually get good
Mhm.
sleep, right? Because like you said, it's like the 7 to 9 hours is kind of the recommendation. But and again, we want to aim for that. But I think the quality of it's super important. And you kind of mentioned the like timing of it. And I think there was something paper pretty recently that came out that talked about how like from a mortality standpoint, like uh this your sleep the timing of it, like you said, is more was almost just more important than the like how long you slept for. I think it was like can't think of the actual words to use there, but again, the timing of it when you like sleep regularity, that's what I'm looking for,
Yep.
was more important.
Yeah, and that's almost like what it seems like now. I think obviously sleep duration is important, but then if you're getting enough sleep, like you said, I think there have been at least one, probably the one you're referring to, but multiple studies now showing like your sleep regularity is just as important. And basically what that refers to is like based on kind of what I've read, it seems like you should probably be going to bed and waking up within the same like 60 minutes every single day, maybe 90 minutes, give yourself a little bit of a buffer there, but certainly like this what's so-called social jet lag where like, oh, you're going to bed at 9 p.m. and waking up at 5 a.m. Monday through Friday, and then say on the weekends you're going to bed at 1 a.m. and waking up at 11 or noon or something. That seems to be the worst because you have like these 3 to 4 hour deviations in when you're waking up and going to bed. So keeping that within like 90 minutes or so having that high sleep regularity seems to be very important. I think that's pretty intuitive. I mean, I'm sure you have experienced like, at least I have, like when I'm going to bed at the same time almost every night and waking up at the same time every morning, that I think tends to influence how I feel much more than, oh, I only slept 6 hours. Like I would rather get 6 hours per night of same bedtime, same wake time versus, I'm getting 8 to 9 hours, but it's like scattered everywhere. It really seems to like influence how I feel. So at least waking up at the same time every day seems to be very important for me. That's one of the things I try to do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's easy to not do that, especially like you said on the weekends. But
Mm-hmm.
that's again, you want to make sure you do that. And like you said, I also like too though that we kind of gave that caveat of like you don't necessarily have to fall asleep at the exact same time, right? Like you said, kind of give that 60 to 90 minute buffer. I always kind of tell people just big thing, just don't let it fall too far away from what you typically do. There, but yeah, no, I agree. I think circadian rhythm in general, I think is super interesting, and I don't know if you feel this way, but as I learn more, I feel like, and based on our modern environment, like that is probably one of the biggest things that people screw up. I think that that's a big area of focus for people and probably often overlooked in the kind of health and fitness space, I feel like.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, it's easy to do, like, especially with I think regarding like when you wake up, that's kind of easy because you can kind of control it. Like oh, I set my alarm and I'm going to wake up at 5:30. But like with the bedtime, it can be so variable. And not to mention, like, we do a bunch of things at night that like F up our sleep. We were watching Netflix like until we go to bed. I'm just as guilty of that as anybody. And, my wife and I are like watching TikTok reels like four
Yeah.
inches from our face, like 2 minutes before we go to bed. I'm like, this cannot be good for my sleep. But yeah, I think it's one of the things that people have kind of neglected, and maybe just for a lack of knowledge in like our society of the importance of it. But now, with guys like Huberman who are talking about the importance of circadian biology, I think it's becoming kind of more mainstream, which is very cool to see.
And yeah, it is a pretty easy, not easy, but it is something that you can, implement. And again, you don't have to make this drastic change from like a nutrition standpoint, right? I think if anything, it just kind of makes things a little bit more efficient, from a body comp change, overall health perspective there. So, and again, simple things like just going outside a little bit more throughout the day can be something simple that you do there. So cool. Well, I guess one area I want to talk to you about is your kind of current training and nutrition. I know you said you're obviously big on cardiovascular side of things, and typically when I have people on here, they're very very weightlifting focused, bodybuilding type focused. So I think it's cool to have somebody on here who is pretty into the cardiovascular side of training, right? So I'm curious to hear a little bit more. I think you just recently ran a marathon, but it sounds like for you that's a pretty somewhat regular thing. But yeah, curious to kind of hear what your training and nutrition kind of looks like. We can start with the training side first.
Yeah, totally. So I am an endurance athlete, always have been an endurance athlete. Since I was 13, I've been running cross country, track, did that in college and stuff. And now just, it's obviously like a hobby now. I mean, I'm somewhat competitive as like an amateur runner, but nobody's paying me to run. It's, I just do it for fun now. But yeah, so I recently ran a marathon, 2:26:28, which was a personal best
Awesome.
by about like 10 minutes, which I was thrilled with. And yeah, it was actually only my third marathon ever. I've been on and off with injuries probably for the past like 6, 7, or 8 years, which has kind of prevented me from doing a lot of the longer distance races. But I've done plenty of 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, and things like that. So regarding like what my training looks like, it's pretty consistent. I don't really like to do seasons like a lot of pro athletes will do, whereas like, oh, it's your on season or your off season. I kind of like to stay in shape year round. And I just find that when I'm building up for a race, I just like to do kind of a quick, like, oh, let's really peak, and then we'll come back down and just kind of maintain. So I prefer that versus having, say, like, oh, for these 2 or 3 months, this is my quote unquote off season. Again, nobody's paying me to run. I don't have a coach. I'm kind of just like doing this thing on my own. So I kind of like to have a consistent training regimen year round. And what that looks like now, kind of in the past year, what it's looked like, I run 4 days per week, which is a lot less than probably runners of kind of my caliber are doing. Most are just strictly running, maybe 5, 6, 7 days a week. But I've chosen a 4 day per week kind of approach to running to mitigate injury risk and kind of just as an experiment lately. And, that might change in the future. But 4 days per week of running, and that's anywhere between 50 and 70 miles per week. So I'm running, 10 to 15 miles a day when I do run. And then I ride a bike 3 days per week. So I'll do that for like anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours whenever, every day that I do it. So pretty much I'm doing cardiovascular exercise, cardio, endurance exercise, whatever you want to call it, 7 days per week. I'll take an off day every now and then, like maybe once or twice a month, but not very often unless I really feel the need for it. After the marathon, I took a few full days off and then some easier days of cycling. But yeah, so 7 days per week, I'm doing endurance training, biking, and running. And then my strength training routine, it's very unsexy, and it should certainly be, I think, better. It's something I definitely need to improve upon. Right now, kind of what it looks like, I have stuff at home. I have kettlebells, I have pull-up bars, things like that. So I'll kind of do body weight stuff 2 to 3 times per week. But everyone was asking me, I had posted a lot about training on social media, about like what my endurance training for the marathon looked like. Everybody was asking, oh, well, what does your strength training look like? I'm like, you don't want me to detail it. I can't, because it's not really anything worth talking about. So yeah, that's an area certainly of improvement, which is kind of cool for me, at least, because I ran this marathon and I was very happy with it. But thinking about areas that I could, improve in, it's obviously like I could probably build up some strength in the gym, upper and lower body strength. So yeah, that's kind of what my training looks like. I walk a lot. I try to walk as much as I can. It's something I've recently become a fan of. If I'm taking my child to daycare or walking the dog or just like taking a walking lunch break, I try to do like an hour probably a day just of like walking. Maybe that's 2 to 3 walks or something like that. I just find that it kind of helps with recovery. I don't do it for fitness because, at this point, with as much running I do, walking
Yeah.
isn't necessarily exercise. But I just find that it helps with recovery. I can think better when I walk, and so that's something I recommend to everyone. And maybe something we'll talk about later, but it's kind of there's some interesting studies that you should walk more and get more steps throughout the day if you're exercising, and it helps with training adaptations. And then one other thing that's a part of my training pretty consistently is using the sauna. I try to sauna 2 to 4 times per week. It honestly depends on what time of the year it is. I mean, I live in Austin, Texas, and so I really cut down on my sauna use during the summer
Yeah.
because literally I would end a run and I was probably like 10 to 15 pounds lighter just because of how much I sweat. So I was like, I don't find the need to go and use the sauna to dehydrate myself even more. But during the winter, I certainly try to get in there 2 to 3 times per week. Ideally, like right after I run or ride my bike. And yeah, so that's kind of what my training looks like these days.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, super in depth. I love it. I got a few questions here on it. So, real quick to first go on the strength training side, and I promise I am going to get into the cardio side, but I'm just more so curious on this. And I think real quick too, it is cool to have somebody on here that has more of an endurance background because, like I said, it is mostly the weightlifting side, and so I think it's interesting to kind of hear the flip side of it, right? Because kind of where I come from, it's like for a while I don't feel this way anymore, but it's like, oh, cardio's bad, it's going to kill your gains,
Mhm.
right? So, but as I learned more, it's like, man, I mean, I think it's super important to get some in, and again, I do want to talk to you about that. But for your training specifically for the strength training, what is kind of your focus in those sessions? Like, is it just you're going in and like you're trying to progressively overload, or is it just like you're kind of going off feel, or like what does that like typically look like
Yeah,
when
I
you're
would
going?
Yeah, I would say it doesn't really look like much like progressively overload. It is kind of just like I would call it like more maintenance strength
Yeah.
routine. So kind of like range of motion stuff and then general strength. So I'm like using kettlebells. I'm doing Bulgarian split squats. I'll do kettlebell swings. I know that's typically not like a strength exercise, but I'll do those. I'll do single leg RDLs with the kettlebells. Any variation of kind of lower body stuff that I can do with that. And then I'll do pull ups. I'll do like kettlebell presses, kettlebell rows, things like that. So not necessarily a program that would be designed for hypertrophy, but rather just kind of like let's maintain this general strength. Things that I think will help my running, but again, like I said, certainly could be improved upon.
So for you, like, is hypertrophy something that you would be interested in, or is that like, hey, if I like again, it's kind of a time cost analysis type thing, and maybe even a performance thing, right? Where it's like you add a little bit of muscle, and now it's like that might not necessarily be the most beneficial for your running. So is that something that, or when you're lifting, it's like, hey, I'm just more so focused on like the kind of strength adaptations of it.
Yeah, I think hypertrophy is certainly something I would be interested in part because, I think in terms of upper body strength, I could probably gain, 3 to 5 pounds of like mass. And overall, I think it might actually be probably beneficial in terms of just giving me some more power for running. I mean, there is the cost aspect of, oh, if you get heavier, you may run slower to a point, but I think I probably have a few pounds that I could gain that would be beneficial. And again, at this point in my life, like sure, I'm trying to optimize to run a fast marathon, but I also just want to be healthy and optimize my long-term performance because again, nobody's paying me to run. It's kind of like more about long-term health here versus just running a fast marathon. So yeah, it would certainly be something I would kind of be interested in, and it's something that I thought about. But again, at this point, it's kind of the time investment. What time per week would it require to actually do a dedicated hypertrophy plan? How much would that take away from the endurance training? So everything's a cost benefit analysis.
Well, and even, depending on how much endurance you decide to keep in and everything, I mean, just a caloric standpoint too, right? I mean, I'm sure you'd have to probably eat a pretty good amount of calories, which I do want to dive into what your nutrition looks like with this kind of activity there. But cool. Okay. So as far as like the cardio side of things go, I mentioned you'll do like 4 runs a week and then 3 kind of bike rides. Are those bikes kind of what you would call, and I'm sure, as an endurance athlete, you're probably sick of hearing this, but like zone 2 type training, is that kind of what that would be considered there with the bike
Yeah,
or?
two of those sessions per week are what I would refer to as like classically the zone two. So they're kind of easy. I might do a couple like sprints here and there during them just to get the heart rate up a little bit, but they're pretty much easy and just used to kind of replace like an easy recovery run. But I will try to do one interval workout on the bike per week. Because running intervals can be pretty like taxing on the body, not just like the cardiovascular system, but biking intervals, what I find, you're able to kind of get your heart rate up, you're able to get your breathing rate up, but you don't get the damage to your legs. You don't get kind of that stress that would, be incurred if I would have done another interval training workout while running. So I do try to do like one more intense bike ride per week. Sometimes that's like I don't know if you're familiar with what Zwift is, but it's kind of like this virtual video game, like cycling platform. You hook your bike up to a trainer and you're like riding this bike in like a virtual world. It's kind of
Pretty
fun,
cool.
but all the high
Yeah.
level like cycling athletes use it, and you can do races on there, and those are hard as hell. And so every now and then, maybe once a month, I'll hop in one of those races and really just kind of burn it out as like a more intense workout. So yeah, two of those are easy. One sometimes is an interval workout, but I'm not doing anything really crazy on the bike.
I'm sure too is part of it the reason, just again kind of do a little bit more cardiovascular training without, like you said, kind of taking on that damage from running and stuff. So is it kind of like a fatigue kind of management type situation as well with doing the bike, or just kind of keep it fresh as well too? Or
Yeah, definitely. I would say fatigue management. I mean, it really is like the reason why I kind of bike, and I'll bike pretty much after every day that I run, I'll like do a bike. I find that, one, it's just a way for me to reduce my running volume and not like increase it too much to maybe increase my injury risk. But I do like to do a decent amount of like cardiovascular volume every week. So that bike is kind of just there. I could obviously just take the day off and like do strength training or something, but I found that I like doing the bike. It kind of changes though in terms of what I'm doing on the bike based on what part of the season I'm in. So I'll do more intense bike riding if it's like a base training. But if I'm doing like, recently when I was building up for this marathon and doing really high quality runs, all of my bikes were kind of just easy because I didn't want to add any extra fatigue on the bike. It was kind of all just about this bike is basically just a bridge to like the next run, just a way to get the heart rate up and kind of get a little bit of a cardiovascular stimulus, but kind of just a easy recovery ride as well.
and then your runs, again, what's kind of the focus there? I'm assuming this probably changes, like you said, based on if you're just kind of like, if you're not peaking for like a marathon and stuff like that. But what, generally speaking, what are the runs kind of based off of? Is it like heart rate? What do you guys typically work on there with those?
Yeah, I won't do a ton of heart rate based training. It's more kind of based on pace is kind of the way I'm prescribing like my runs for myself. And so no matter the season, I'm kind of doing the same thing every week. So I'll typically do one run that's like a 10 to 12 mile, just like an easy run. Say that's typically on like a Tuesday. And then on Thursday, I'll typically do an interval workout. So that just changes based on week, based on what I'm training for at the moment. But I'll typically prescribe that based on pace. So, like for the marathon, I'll try to, run intervals at my race pace or maybe a little bit faster. Then I'll do another medium, what I'll call a medium long run during the week. So maybe that's like 13, 14, or 15 miles, just easy. And then on the weekend, I'll do a long run. So a long run will be like 2 hours or more. That's pretty much the same structure I kind of follow year round. The only thing that changes is how fast are you running on the intervals, and am I doing like maybe a workout during the long run where I'm running faster at certain points. Sometimes that changes and I'm trying to peak for a race, but that's kind of the structure that I follow during the week throughout the year.
Cool. And then like I said too, with the nutrition, what is that? I mean, what's a kind of typical intake for you? Is it just like, do you track, or is it you just kind of eat off of, kind of how you feel, track your body weight, or what does that typically look like?
Yeah, I don't track, and there's kind of a specific reason for that. I tracked at one point in my life, like long time ago. For me, when I track, it tends to actually spiral into bad habits instead of better habits. I know some people like to track to keep themselves on. When I track, I tend to unintentionally or maybe subconsciously restrict what I'm eating.
Yeah.
So I find that not tracking kind of helps. I do monitor my body weight. Recently, that's something I've actually started doing a little bit more. In the past, again, I didn't really even monitor my body weight much because it could just kind of spiral into like weird habits and doing it like a couple times a day, which doesn't really even make any sense. You kind of just get yourself into these weird patterns. So I'll do it a few times per week. I'll measure my body weight, and that's kind of the metric that I'm using now to see, am I eating maybe a little too much, a little too little? It rarely ends up being too much. So often I'm kind of using it just to make sure, especially like during peak marathon, you're not dropping too much weight. But I became interested a little bit more in my body weight as I approached the marathon, just as like kind of this benchmark of, okay, I ran this time and this was kind of like my floating around body weight. And just for reference in the future to kind of like see, I mean, I've pretty much been the same weight since like high school. It really hasn't changed much. I've been anywhere between 145 and 155. It's kind of been like my weight. It rarely changes very much. So that's kind of what I use to maybe determine if I'm eating too much or too little. In regards to like how am I tracking or how am I dictating like what I eat? Like you said, it's kind of just based on hunger levels, my activity levels throughout the day, and things like that. But I think if you were to track it day to day, it would probably just end up being somewhere between 2,800 and 3,500 calories per day on any given day, more or less some days than others. Without tracking, I just think that's kind of, the amount that I'm going to end up eating. Again, if I run more on a particular day, I might try to eat a little bit more. If I run less, I might not eat as much. But what tends to change more is kind of my macronutrient intake versus my total calories. Because what I kind of find is like, I think that, if you're in like a training cycle and you're doing a lot of training, okay, so you have a day where you don't exercise as much. Maybe I run 1 hours versus two. I try not to let that dictate how much I eat. I try to just eat what I would on a normal day because, like, overall, you're probably just going to make up for maybe a caloric deficit that you might occur on a day where you ran 26 miles and you simply just couldn't eat enough. There's kind of a limit to sometimes how much you can eat. Like, if you run 26 miles in a day, you might be in a caloric deficit that day unless you get like a pint of Ben and Jerry's ice cream or something for dinner. So I'll try to just kind of keep it consistent, even on like recovery days. If I don't run, it's like, let's just like eat, pretend like you ran and just eat. And I think at the long term, that's kind of beneficial. So what I do tend to manipulate more is like my macronutrient intake, not a ton. I mean, I'm not like low carb. I'm not necessarily super, super high carb, but if I have a lower intensity day, like maybe my bike ride and my heart rate doesn't even go above like 120 or something, I might eat a little bit more low carb, and I'm certainly not going to have like a super high sugar breakfast afterwards or something because I didn't really burn that many carbohydrates. So that's kind of what I focus on a little bit more versus how much am I eating. It's like, oh, maybe eat more or less carbs this day based on kind of the intensity of the workout. That's kind of what my framework is like.
And I'm sure for you, that's something that you've kind of like worked on over time as well, too. That wasn't something that you just picked up right away. I'm sure that's trial and error over years there of kind of figuring that out as well, too.
Yeah, totally. It's all kind of a, experiment that's constantly iterating, which is kind of the fun thing about, fitness and training. It's like you do some things that work and you do some things that don't. And then eventually, I'm still changing things up with my diet, whether it's like timing or what I'm eating or, things like that around exercise, eating around exercise, always changing things up to see kind of what works and what doesn't.
You mentioned that you did something a little bit different this time prepping for with your body weight. So you said you monitored it a little bit more. How did that go? Was there anything specific you were trying to get out of it? And I guess maybe what were some insights around that?
Yeah, I think just to kind of see one, it was just to kind of like I had never really for several years I hadn't really consistently tracked my body weight. And again, I think I probably was the same body weight a few years ago than I was now, but I was just kind of interested in seeing how much it fluctuated and what I was kind of in the week or two leading up to the marathon. To be completely honest, I did maybe try to manipulate it a little bit because I am conscious of, okay, well, there's a weight that you'll probably race your fastest at. If you're a little too heavy, you'll race slower. But if you're a little too light, you sacrifice power. And especially for me, it raises my injury risk. And if I get down to a certain point, I've been kind of prone in the past to bone stress injuries. And so if I get kind of too close to like a certain weight, I'm like, oh, I need to like definitely focus on eating a bit more because I'm kind of in that like dangerous territory. So I was actually kind of curious in this time manipulating it. My goal was kind of let's get to kind of I'm waking up around 145 to 147, something like that, which I think for me is on the upper end of kind of not like the upper end, I guess. It's kind of more on the lower end of healthy. So 150, I think for me would probably be a more ideal body weight just for overall health, hormone production, probably even 155. I mean, I'm 5'11", so I could probably even be 155. Most people would even think that that's incredibly too low, but obviously as a distance runner, like I've never been over 155. So I was kind of like, oh, let's target this weight. And as I started my taper and started to run less, I kind of was more conscious of like, let's try to stick around this body weight and then see like if I can run this marathon at this body weight, like this might be my quote unquote racing weight to try for the future. So I was kind of doing that to use as like a benchmark. That was kind of all. And just to kind of see how it changed, I guess, throughout the taper. And it was interesting because what I noticed is, despite running a little bit less and eating, nearly the same, the body weight didn't really change that much. And I think it was kind of a fascinating thing for me just to look at where like you can freak yourself out about like, oh, you didn't run as much on a day and you ate a little too much and you're going to gain weight. And ultimately you're like at the end of every week, like you're almost the same weight. So it can be kind of be eye opening to do something like that.
Well, it's interesting as you're saying that. I know exercise and, yeah, just exercise in general. I feel like it really does a good job of kind of like regulating your appetite. Like you have a much better job of kind of like matching, your what you eat with that. And so that kind of makes sense there with that, right? It seems like
Mhm.
that's kind of part of what potentially what was going on there. But I would say, as somebody that expends as much energy doing your training, I mean, you do need to be careful though and make sure that you are consuming enough food because, like you said there, it's like if your body weight starts to trend down and you get too low, that's where like your injury risk starts to increase a little bit. And then you mentioned, I think, some like how you feel from day to day and everything like that starts to get impacted a little bit as well too.
Yeah, totally. And one of the other things I think I was a little bit more conscious of, and I think, for a lot of people can maybe influence, obviously your total caloric intake kind of throughout the day matters, and you don't want to be in a deficit if you're trying to maintain weight and things like that. But what was another focus for me with my training as of late was kind of focusing on the nutrition period around my workout. Obviously, the day to day and throughout the day nutrition is important, but I'm like, okay, well, if there's one point where you want to optimize your nutrition, it's making sure to fuel during the workout. If that's the case, I don't fuel during all of my runs, but like twice a week, I will take like energy gels and things if it's like a higher intensity workout or a longer run. And then making sure afterwards to fuel properly, especially if, like in my case, most days I'm working out fasted in the morning, making sure to not do what I, had done in the past. I'm going to work out and then I'm just going to kind of like sip coffee until lunch or whatever.
Yeah.
And, that's a habit I've really, really changed. And I'm like, I'm at least sure I'm not a huge breakfast eater, but I've implemented I do like a real nutrient dense like smoothie after my workout. So it's got like protein and I put my creatine in there and it's like got fruit and peanut butter and a bunch of stuff. So I have that like right after my workout. So I'm ensuring I'm getting some nutrition rather than extending that caloric deficit like 2 or 3 more hours, which I just don't think is good for recovery, for feeling better, for adapting to the training and things like that. So I think regardless of eating enough, just making sure to like eat enough around the workout has been super important for me as well.
Yeah, like you said, too many. Like again, it's like, oh, hey, overall caloric intake's the most important, and then people over kind of look that the timing around your workout, and that can make or break, especially like you said, kind of that post workout, especially making sure you're not going too long after that. So cool. I was trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to bring up around that. Oh, the other thing I want to ask you, what's kind of your supplement routine like?
Yeah, supplements. So I take a fair amount of supplements, but not a ton. So what I currently take, and all of these I pretty much take at the same time of day in the morning. A lot of them are in like the post workout smoothie. So some people consider protein to be a supplement. I do whey protein every day, so I do supplement with whey protein. I have been taking creatine probably for the last few months. That's kind of a new addition to the supplement stack. I do 5 grams per day of that, considering maybe doing 10, but I don't know if there's kind of a reason for me to do that. So 5 grams per day of creatine. I
Can I
do,
before sorry
yeah, go
before
for
we
it.
go
Yeah.
on, I want to stop you at the creatine one real quick because that was the one I was going to ask. So you said that was something you added in recently. Um, Again, is there any particular reason why it's like now you added in now? Yeah, just kind of curious to hear a little bit more about that.
It just kind of, was on like my radar and I was pretty much, after reading all the research on it and things like that, I think it was just like I kind of had like this, oh, I need to be taking it, or there's no reason really not to take it. I know endurance athletes haven't typically been like the target of nutrition or creatine research, like, but there's a lot of evidence out there. Well, I won't say a lot of evidence for endurance athletes, but there's kind of a lot of theory as to why it could help. So the strength aspect, obviously, I know people in your world, the kind of strength conditioning and body composition is like creatine for strength, well known. It's been studied for decades and decades and decades, and everybody's taking it. But I think endurance athletes have typically not scoffed at it, but just been like, oh, what could creatine do for me? I'm not trying to get big. Well, you know, the body just uses creatine in with high energy phosphates for the creatine phosphate system. So by supplementing with it, you're literally just kind of increasing your energy stores and your ability to produce energy, which can help for any type of activity. If you're a runner who's strength training, it obviously could help there too. The recovery benefits potentially are there again. And then something around like bone health. I was listening to a creatine researcher talk the other day just about how the bone cells, the bone forming cells, they use ATP in their functions just like all other cells. So there was enough reason for me to be like, there's no downside to it, and there's all these potential upsides. So I'm just going to take 5 grams per day. And again, it's impossible to say like since I do so much whether this was contributing to my performance or not, but it's certainly not hurting, and I do feel good while I'm taking it. A lot of endurance athletes are sometimes worried about there's like the water retention, there's the potential to like gain weight. I haven't noticed that. I think a lot of the weight gain is sometimes associated with either one. I think when you just start taking it, or if you're doing like a loading phase, which most people don't even recommend at this point. So I didn't really, I've been on it for a few months now, and there may have been some initial weight gain, I guess, but now I don't really experience any of that. So that wasn't really a concern for me.
You mentioned too, kind of like 10 up to 10 grams. Is that more sort of for like potential cognitive type benefits from it, or was it just to maybe just get a little bit more out of it overall?
Yeah, I think maybe just to get a little bit more out of it. I think the 10-gram dose might be, if you're somebody who's like larger, like a man or maybe even a woman over 200 pounds, maybe 10 grams might be necessary just because you have, a greater muscle mass. For the cognitive benefits, interestingly enough, it seems like you need even like a higher dose. Like if you're trying to get that quick cognitive benefit from it, it seems like you need a dose of like 20 to 30 grams at a single time. And nobody, I don't think anybody recommends doing that every single day. But if there was a time, there's like a study that I covered recently on sleep deprivation. And,
Yep.
if you take 30 grams of creatine beforehand, it could be beneficial. But yeah, so if people are like looking at the cognitive benefits or interested in the cognitive benefits of it, just know that those are like, yeah, with 20 to 30-gram dose, that seems to be necessary for it to be actually like taken up by the brain in such a short period of time.
Yeah, I as I was kind of researching for this episode, I did see that you had one of your articles was on sleep and creatine. And I had seen that too, and I think it's super interesting. But yeah, I think creatine in general, it's like you said, it's one of those ones that it's kind of, I mean, it's not the most expensive supplement. It's got a ton of research behind it, so it's kind of like, hey, at the very least, it's not going to hurt you, and there's a chance that it's probably helping in some form or fashion. So might as well, make sure you take it. It's not going to hurt there. So,
Yeah, totally.
sorry, I cut you off on it. What were some of the other ones that you?
Yeah, I do a vitamin D. I take I think like 4,000 IU of that per day, just as kind of like a preventative thing. I probably get plenty of sun. I might not need that much, but I see kind of no downside to taking that dose, which is kind of like the recommended dose of it. I'll take omega-3 supplement. I take that every day. EPA, DHA, and then recently something new I've been kind of trying out ashwagandha and rhodiola. I've been kind of alternating between those and taking them. I'll do like a capsule a day. I don't remember like what the doses of that is, but just kind of experimenting with it, see how I feel. Again, when you're doing so much, it's hard to attribute, any one thing, but it seems to be maybe doing something or at least not hurting. So that's kind of all that I currently take. The additional one that I wouldn't really maybe characterize as a supplement, I take like exogenous ketones a few times per week after my workout. To kind of promote post-exercise recovery. That's kind of another one that is speculative based on maybe some mechanisms and stuff. But I've been taking that throughout like the marathon training block too. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Interesting. You brought up rhodiola. That was one. So I recently we had our first child, and I know you said you have a kid, so you understand. When you first have a kid, it's like that first little bit is pretty crazy, right? You're not sleeping
Oh yeah.
very much. And as I was kind of doing some research, rhodiola was one that kept kind of popping up. There. I started taking it. I felt like I kind of noticed a difference. There. So I'm just curious. Is that something that you've kind of noticed there with rhodiola and stuff like that from like an energy
Yeah,
standpoint?
I think so. A lot of the thing, I think maybe one of the main thing, I think similar to you, like when I think honestly, I initially started taking creatine when we had our first child. So he's or not our only child. We don't have two. Our first and only child so far. I actually started taking it right around the time he was born because of I think several years ago I read a study and wrote about it that taking creatine, and this was a study in mice, but taking creatine actually reduced the amount of sleep that they needed. So they were
Yep.
essentially able to like operate on less sleep. And so I was like, okay, well, this kind of makes sense to like, I know I'm going to be getting less sleep. So like, I'm not going to take something to help me sleep, but I'm going to take something that will allow me to kind of adapt to being, low on sleep. So that's actually initially why I started taking creatine. It wasn't even for any single performance benefit. But rhodiola ashwagandha too. So kind of them being the quote unquote the adaptogens and just maybe allowing you to handle stress better or handle less sleep better. Or I mean, there is some evidence I think that like ashwagandha and rhodiola might promote sleep. So yeah, I definitely took them for a similar reason and kind of did notice some of the benefits with them. I wake up kind of feeling more alert, even if I don't get enough sleep. So again, whether this stuff is like placebo, whether it's just me fooling myself into thinking they're working. Um, they could be having some effect, but I certainly have seen a benefit since I've started taking them. Something's changed.
Well, there was some recent research on rhodiola, right? That didn't because when I was looking into it, I saw it for like the kind of energy aspect of it, and like you said, handling stress and like be able to handle that a little bit better. But I think recently there was some research on rhodiola about it kind of helping with performance as well too, potentially.
Hmm.
Am I correct, or is that anything that you're familiar with there on
Yeah,
that?
you might be, but I can't say that I'm aware of it. Yeah, all that I'm aware of really is some of like the initial stuff on ashwagandha, but I haven't not currently aware of anything on rhodiola, but I'm sure, yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. I think there's a lot more research kind of coming out on those two recently.
So it's actually from Grant Tinsley.
Okay,
Yeah, so I guess a review of the literature of it. So again, some reading potentially for people that are listening
cool.
there. So cool.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you sharing everything with your training and stuff. I think it's super interesting. So to go back to the cardio thing, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. So like we talked about, again, people that listen to this are probably a little bit more focused on like building muscle, right? Body composition type stuff. And so again, there for a while it was like, hey, don't do any cardio, it's going to kill your gains, right? So for somebody that is more into the endurance side of things, I mean, what would you say to somebody that's thinking that way? And like, what would be the importance to add in some cardiovascular training, endurance type training into your training if you are more kind of physique focused?
Yeah, I would say that there are kind of like two main benefits. And I mean, I don't even know. I mean, the other one might be, or I guess there could kind of be three. So one, I just think from like a body composition perspective, I mean, there is a role for it to potentially help there because, cardiovascular exercise does burn kind of more calories overall than like a strength training session would for like a similar amount of time. So if you're looking to put yourself in a caloric deficit or, increase your fat burning a little bit, not that, fat burn during exercise directly translates into that fat, melting off of your body, but I certainly think that there's a role in cardiovascular exercise in improving body composition. I mean, see a lot of very lean runners, so there could be something there. So I think that's one of the benefits. But for me, being kind of like the cardiovascular researcher and like very interested in that, I think that strength trained athletes, people who are really just kind of focused on that, they should think about it in two ways. So one, there's a lot of evidence lately coming out about VO2 max and how that relates to better longevity, reduce risk for diseases. I just wrote something about today. You better your fitness, lower your risk for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So it appears that the fitter you are regarding all those aspects, regarding your VO2 max or your maximal aerobic capacity, better health span, better lifespan, and really the only way to improve your VO2 max is to engage in endurance or cardiovascular exercise. You can't really do it through strength training, despite what there might be a recent study I think showing you could increase your VO2 max through strength training, but completely honest, it's like that's could be a statistical artifact or something. I just think unless you're very unfit, doing kind of strength training isn't going to really improve your VO2 max. So doing that to improve your VO2 max, also just from a cardiovascular and a heart health standpoint. So if we think about as we age, our blood vessels kind of get stiffer. Our heart can actually get stiffer. And all of those are could put people at risk for cardiovascular disease. If your blood pressure is high as well, that's kind of one of the biggest risk factors for heart disease and neurocognitive conditions as well. And so what some research has shown, and the name of the researcher is blanking on me right now. His name might be Andrew Flat, something like that. He's on X and he posts about this a lot. But engaging in strength training inherently kind of your blood pressure is elevated when you're strength training. It's just a very just like cardio exercise, but it's very very kind of like stressful. And if you're engaging just solely in strength training, you do kind of run the risk of maybe increasing your risks of having like higher blood pressure or not necessarily doing anything to improve the function of your blood vessels or your blood pressure or your heart health. So for strength athletes in particular, cardio becomes, I think, even more beneficial to kind of, I won't say offset the negative effects because there aren't negative effects of like strength training, but just to kind of balance out that and make sure you're benefiting your cardiovascular system from a health perspective. Like, obviously, no, you're not focused on performance. You don't care how fast you can run a 5K. You don't care how fast you can run a marathon. But just from a heart health perspective and reducing your risk for chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease seems super important. Cardiovascular exercise seems super important. So that would kind of be my main recommendation. It doesn't even have to be anything intense. 90 minutes or 150 minutes ideally of zone 2 exercise per week, 3 days of 30 minutes, something like that, I think would be great for anybody who's strength training, even if you're just focused on physique and things like that. Can walking help? I think, but I would probably recommend doing something a little bit more intense. I mean, if you're pretty fit and you're doing strength training, the odds are like you're not going on a walk and your heart rate's going to be at 120 beats per minute. At least I hope not. I mean, it's a very brisk walk. Maybe if you're going uphill and you're wearing like a rucksack or something like that, it could get pretty high. But maybe get a stationary bike, or try to get on the stairmaster or something that's going to get your heart rate to like 75% of your max, and do that during the week. So I think you need a little bit more than walking, and there's some evidence that would show that, especially as you get older. You just need something more intense than walking. Walking's not really the cardio that's gonna get you the heart health benefits.
Yeah, no, I love all that. I think all those are great points, and I think, like you said too, again, just from like sometimes the blood pressure can get kind of high, so that can be something that can offset that. Like you said, there's no really negative to it, but if there was any sort of negative, that could be it. So again, kind of switching that up there and making sure you're doing some of that. I don't know if you hit. I don't know if this was something that you mentioned throughout it, and I apologize if you did. But the recovery side of things too, right? I mean, as I've kind of done a little bit more like research on this and looking into it, it seems like too, big benefit for like a lifter could also be like the recovery, like in between sessions, in between sets as well too. Is that something that like you see that could be missing from someone who is just focused on like the strength side of things?
Yeah, I think so too. More so related to maybe not intra-set like recovery, but I think that doing cardio, after or on the days where you're not lifting could actually probably promote your recovery, because yes, you are promoting blood flow, and anything that promotes blood flow is going to enhance recovery. But now that you bring that up, it actually kind of reminds me of some interesting evidence that was out there that actually was showing that doing endurance training actually increased your ability to adapt to your hypertrophic response to resistance training. It was just like this one study, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but they basically did a pre-training period. They did like a month of endurance training before they engaged in like a 6 to 8 week strength training program or something like that. And doing that, so pre-training with endurance training, actually led to greater strength and hypertrophy adaptations during that resistance training. So I think they're very synergistic. There was a lot of this talk like decade or two ago about the so-called interference effect, and you mentioned this earlier, like, oh, if you're doing both at the same time, you're going to like blunt your gains, and none of that seems to be true at all. The only reason that seems to be true, and for endurance athletes too, oh, is doing strength going to blunt my gains in endurance training? The only way that that's true is if one takes away from the other. So if you're doing so much cardio that you don't strength train as hard, or if you're doing so much strength training that your runs or your rides suffer, but all else being equal, so you maintain your same volume of endurance and strength training and do them at the same time, there seems to be no interference effect at all. And if anything, it's synergistic. Endurance athletes benefit when they strength train. Strength training athletes, physique athletes likely benefit when they engage in endurance training. So I think there can only be like a net benefit. Again, as long as you're not spending so much time doing cardio that you strength train less, because then you're not going to adapt as much.
Yep, like you said, the big thing is you just want to make sure that it doesn't really impact the whatever you're trying to do there, right? Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
big thing there. And again, I'm sure like again, how you're doing it, the intensity that you're doing it, and I'm saying, I mean, really for both, but if we're talking from like if you're more focused on weightlifting and you're doing cardio, again, the more you do, the more intense it is, the more often, like that's where you're going to start to kind of see the. So as long as you're somewhat smart about it, I think you're going to be fine there. I'm assuming too that obviously like your caloric intake, what you do from a nutrition perspective, probably is also going to be another like big thing there that's going to impact that as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of funny because like when I was in college, like running cross country, we would go to the weight room probably twice a week, maybe three times per week. And even then, like, I was an exercise science major, so I like had enough knowledge, but you're always like, oh, I don't want to lift too much because I'm not going to get too big. And then like in hindsight, I'm thinking, okay, dude, there is no way that like you couldn't gain a single pound with as much as you. I mean, I was running 90 to 100 miles a week, and it's like you would be lucky to put on, an ounce of weight due to strength training, and I'd be lucky to do so. So like endurance athletes are always worried about getting too bulky. It's like, listen, that is the least of your problems is getting too bulky. I mean, you have to double your caloric intake probably for that to happen. But yeah, certainly. I mean, if you're strength training and trying to maximize hypertrophy, if you do engage in cardio and you're not trying to lose weight, then you do want to make sure to kind of offset that, caloric deficit by eating a little bit more. But, if you're doing 30 minutes of cardio, you're not burning that many, calories, maybe 300 to 500 calories, and just, have like you know, an extra little serving at dinner or something like that. And so, yeah, most people aren't really concerned about that. Most people have a fine time kind of eating enough. But if it is a concern, you want to make sure to increase your energy intake to make sure you have enough energy to train.
So where do you feel like the kind of that because like I'm sure this is something like you've heard over time too of like, like part of why in the body comp world of like, oh, don't do cardio because it's going to kill your metabolism or it's going to ruin your metabolism. Where do you think that stems from?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think I could tell you, Jeff. Like, I mean, I don't even when I guess when I hear the phrase like kills your metabolism, my question is like, what does that mean? I mean, I guess that there's like this whole idea that maybe if your metabolism's running so much, you're in a caloric deficit that your body's going to eventually like start to compensate by reducing how much energy it like inputs into things like that. I don't really think that it probably originated anywhere related to science. It's kind of maybe just this myth that kind of perpetuated sort of like the whole like starvation mode kind of thing. It's like, oh, if you intermittent fast, you're going to go into starvation mode. It's like, well, not really. Like your body just like starts burning fat. It doesn't really shut down or whatever, unless you're chronically actually starving. But most people have never gone more than 24
Yeah.
hours without eating. So honestly, I don't think I could tell you where it came from.
Yeah. Well, I think you're kind of right there that again, it's kind of like you said, the energy compensation kind of and like combining it with like again, people that's maybe they get into fitness and like want to lose weight and so they just do a bunch of cardio training and then they are eating super low calorie for a little bit, right? Like you said there, that's
Mhm.
probably more so what it's coming from there, but I didn't know if there was anything specific where it's like, yeah, yep, this is where that came from. So you kind of mentioned this earlier, but as far as somebody who, let's say, again, their main goal is physique, they really want to build some muscle. I mean, what would you say is kind of what would you like to see them do per week in terms of like cardio training? What would that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think that on well, most of the recommendations and kind of the evidence kind of fits with that is a minimum of 150 minutes per week and probably on the higher end 300 minutes per week. And I know that may seem like a lot, but that's kind of for health and longevity. I mean, that seems to be optimal. So the bare minimum, though, I think would be 50 minutes per week. So that's three days per week. Maybe you're doing 5 days per week of 30 minutes, 3 days per week of like an hour or 45 minutes to an hour. I think that kind of seems to be the bare minimum. So do that like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or however fits best with your strength training split. That's kind of what my recommendation would be, even for and then if people aren't really strength training and focused on that, I think that upper end of 300 minutes per week would probably be ideal. Just 150 minutes, even for, if for people who aren't strength training, I guess that seems to be a little bit too low to kind of influence health. And you never want to say too low because, there's this whole idea that any exercise is better than none. Well, of course that is, but there are people recommending that. So I try to kind of be a little more bullish on, recommending like this is what people should do. Because, of course, if you're doing nothing, doing 150 minutes is better. But like, if we're actually seeking optimal, like where does actually kind of start to plateau? That's kind of where you want to be, is like where not where the slope starts going upward, but where it starts to plateau. So what's the maximum you could do without kind of diminishing returns? That's kind of what I would think most people would want to strive for if you have the time, if you have the means, and so on and so forth. And for me, that appears to be around, based on my read of the data, like the 300 minutes per week. So if you have the time and you want to kind of do a lot of cardio in your strength training as well, maybe aim for that amount.
Um, what would you like in terms of like how to set it up? Would you want someone to focus more on like kind of lower impact stuff like the bike? Would you prefer them to get out to run, or does it really not matter at the end of the day?
I don't think it matters. I mean, whatever you kind of enjoy doing. There are people who hate running, so I'm not going to tell everybody they should run, despite me being a runner. And I would love everybody ran, but I don't think some people just don't like it. I think the stationary bike is an awesome tool. Whether it's a Peloton or just another cheap bike that you buy, like one of the ones you might see in a gym. Anything would work. The stationary bike tends to be great because you can really do like some high intensity stuff that's low impact. The assault bikes are typically popular among the strength training crowd as well. Those are the air brake bike where you have kind of the pedals in the arms. The only downside to that is like doing that just for an hour could kind of be, I don't know, a little bit monotonous and it's loud, and I don't know, some people like it, but that tends to be good for doing like high intensity
Yeah.
intervals because you can really get your heart rate up. But yeah, the modality doesn't really matter. I mean, biking, running, those are two great things. Heck, if you want to swim, that's fine as well. But people might have a hard time if they don't have the right technique getting their heart rate kind of high enough when they swim. So no, I'm agnostic to, whether you're biking or running, just do something that you enjoy.
Yep, something that's gonna keep you consistent with it there. So what would you say is, is for somebody in this kind of avatar, like what would you say is more important? Is it the volume or is it like the intensity? Like what would you say in terms of trying to, I guess, maintain your cardiovascular health, but also maybe see a small improvement as well too with that?
Yeah, what seems to be important kind of is your weekly output, but there's some evidence indicating that like overall exercise intensity might be a little bit more important. So, and I think it kind of makes sense to me because for most people, they're not really going to be pushing the limits of volume. I mean, you really have to do a lot of volume for that to kind of have like this massive effect, but you can get a really, really good stimulus to not only your heart, but also, your mitochondria and your, overall just physical health with high intensity exercise. So that's kind of seems to be something that really kind of moves the lever. And so if someone were to come to me and say like, "Oh, would you prefer that I do," and obviously, the conclusion to this as will be you should do a little bit low and a little bit of high every single week. But if they were to come to me and say, "Okay, should I do like 5 to 6 hours of like zone 2 or can I do 90 to 150 minutes of maybe higher intensity exercise per week?" I would probably say the latter. Do a little bit more high intensity if you're kind of time limited. You're going to get a little more bang for your buck. Obviously, don't run the risk of overtraining. You shouldn't be doing high intensity exercise every single day. But if you have only, and I say only in quotes, but only 90 minutes per week to work out, you can run. You can afford to make that a little bit more high intensity. Whereas, yeah, if you're doing 8 hours per week of cardiovascular exercise, or for somebody like me doing way more, you can't do high intensity for all of that. A lot of it is going to be zone 2 just naturally. So intensity seems to be pretty important. And I think so. I'll talk to the physique athletes and the strength athletes now, like we have been. Just make sure to do a couple high intensity sessions per week, and then maybe do a low zone 2, session every week. So do a couple high intensity sessions where maybe they're just 30 minutes, and then do a 60-minute longer, aerobic exercise bout on the weekend. That would kind of be my recommendation. And I think that's pretty in line with the data, like 60 to 90 minutes once a week, 2 days per week, 30 to 45 minutes. You can make those a little bit more high intensity, and I think you'd be golden.
Would those be a little bit more like kind of interval type style training, or is it like continuous there?
Yeah, you could do either. So you could do a continuous one. And obviously, if you do a continuous one, that might be, we keep referring to zones, but that might be more like a zone 3 type
Yeah.
of thing. But then you could do intervals where you're like, you're at 90 to 95% of your maximal heart rate for 30 seconds to a minute, and you're doing that several times in a row. So it could be either, but more people tend to enjoy the interval based stuff a little bit more because it's a little bit more dynamic than just saying, "Oh, I'm going to be kind of like at 80% of my maximal heart rate for 30 minutes." Like that's kind of painful, but doing the intervals where you're doing 90%, 70%, 90%, 70%, that seems to be like a lot more fun for some people sometimes.
Yep. And again, it comes back to, I mean, the enjoyment aspect of it, right? You got to find something that you can actually do because that's going to be the most important there. What
Totally.
ways do you typically have people like how can somebody track this? Like, how do they know they're improving their cardiovascular fitness?
Yeah, so there are a few ways to do it, and let's just assume, I'll assume that people don't have access to like a lab where they can go and get a VO2 max test done, every month to see if they're improving. So I think the number one way, the easiest way, will be everybody has a heart rate monitor these days, pretty much. I mean, if you have a Whoop, if you have a wristwatch, a GPS watch, or a Ring, even, or a Fitbit, you have some way to measure your heart rate. Apple Watches even do it. So essentially what you can do is, at the same exercise intensity, so that could be your power output on a bike, your pace running outside, look at what your heart rate is. And, if today you go on a run and you're running 9 minutes per mile and your heart rate is 150 beats per minute, and a month from now you run at 9 minutes per mile and your heart rate is 135 beats per minute, then you got fitter because you're able to run the same pace at a lower heart rate. Or alternatively, you know, let's run at 135 heart rate and let's see how fast I can get running at that heart rate. So you're either running, at a lower heart rate at the same pace, or you're running faster at the same heart rate. I guess could be two ways to just say the same thing. And so that's one way to indicate that you're getting fitter because you're becoming more, efficient. So that would be the best way. Have somebody they could do a test. You could go out and do a 12-minute run. How far can you run in 12 minutes? That's pretty easy. The run itself isn't easy, but it's a simple test to do. So maybe if you want to test your fitness, today you go and run 12 minutes hard, and then a few months from now, do it again. And if you run further, then you got fitter. those are kind of just two ways to do it if people want to. Another one would be, if you do have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Garmin or whatever, a lot of those will estimate your VO2 max. You can look at that as well. And, I've expressed before kind of my thoughts on those things aren't always the most accurate. So numerically, they're not accurate. But what they are accurate in is kind of the trend.
Okay.
So if they go up, it's very likely that you got fitter. No, if it says your VO2 max is 55, maybe your VO2 max isn't. Your VO2 max could be 50, it could be 58. But if it goes from 50 to 55, rest assured you probably got fitter by some metric. So your VO2 max probably improved. Is it the actual number that it says? Maybe not. So those would kind of be three ways. Do an actual performance test. Just go and test yourself. Look at your heart rate while running, and then use that objective or subjective metric on your watch to see if your VO2 max actually went up. I think those would be three good ways for people to measure kind of their fitness pretty easily. Or sign up for a 5K and
Do that.
do it a couple months apart and see if you get better.
Just to play like devil's advocate, I think those are great. But obviously, like some of those, like the VO2 max, I think is a good one. The test though, that's obviously something that, and again, obviously this is true for anything, but it's just like, hey, like you have to understand too, like if you're under recovered or again, I'm sure there's some certain things that obviously could potentially impact that. Again, I understand that none of these are exact sciences, and people want the exact answer for everything, and it's like you're not necessarily going to get that. But I think more so just to like let the listener know that if they do go and try this, like obviously your recovery around that period of time is obviously going to be something, or like if you go train outside and normally you don't and it's hotter, like those are going to be some things that could potentially impact like your heart rate, and like that could kind of screw that up a little bit potentially.
No, that's a really great point. I mean, ideally, yeah, you want to do your own randomized control trial, which is obviously impossible because things in life change. But yeah, if you're going to do that 12-minute test or something like that, or run with your heart rate, kind of make sure the temperature and the humidity and the wind and where you're running or doing it, whatever, are all the same, or at least as close as they could be. Because like, yeah, you said that perfectly. I think there are so many things just from day to day that could influence like how you feel and what your heart rate looks like on a run. So yeah,
And even like sleep, stress, caffeine intake, I'm sure those
totally.
are
Yeah.
things as well too, right? That
Hydration, all kinds of stuff like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then one more thing on that, resting heart rate. Is that anything you ever use for anything like that? Like in terms of cardiovascular fitness or anything like your resting heart
Yeah,
rate?
resting heart rate's a good one that I kind of forgot to maybe bring up, but I think that can be a great indicator of fitness. If your resting heart rate goes down, you could get fitter, cardiovascularly fitter. What I do use resting heart rate for myself at least, is not necessarily as an indicator of fitness, but I think it's a good measure for recovery. I know like HRV, heart rate variability, is kind of a popular metric these days for assessing recovery. I don't really put much stock in it. I haven't found that it's very useful for myself, and people who are kind of experts in measuring HRV and the science of it just kind of note that unless you're really using one of the gold standard devices, which would be you actually have an EKG on your chest and you're controlling for your respiratory rate and you're laying down and it's in the morning. Um, Unless you're doing that, then the HRV measures from some of these wearable devices are next to useless. So I would not recommend that people kind of, use that as like a guide in the morning to whether you should train or not. I don't use it. I don't think most people should. But resting heart rate, I find, is very reliable and kind of very predictive of my physiological state. And I talked about this before elsewhere, but like there are kind of two ways that it can go. And I think for most people, you'll have to kind of determine how your heart rate responds to various states of like what I'll call overtraining or overreaching, or maybe you're just like stressing yourself out too much. In one case, I think this is kind of when most cases this happens. If you're too stressed, you trained hard maybe the day before or whatever, your resting heart rate will be elevated. For a lot of people, that's an indicator, okay, I should probably chill out today. If your resting heart rate's normally 60 and you wake up and it was like 67 overnight, or it's 67 during the day, you might be a little too stressed. There's an alternative scenario, and this is actually what happens to me, where it's I've heard it referred to by some people as like this parasympathetic overtraining, where your heart rate will actually be lower, maybe not at rest, but during exercise, you have like a hard time getting your heart rate up. So I'll find that if I do maybe a couple hard days in a row, or I'm just overly stressed, like there's a lot going on in life in addition to training, I'll go out for like a run or a bike ride, and my heart rate just like won't budge. Like I can run super hard and it might not even crack 140. And that's an indicator to me that I'm taking it a little bit too hard and then might need a couple recovery days. So I think, that just takes some kind of learning and people to realize, oh, well, that's weird. My heart rate's not going, very high today. And over time I've learned, like, when that happens to me, it means I'm overtrained. I need to, like, eat a little bit more that day, or I need to just train less, or maybe take an easier day tomorrow. For a lot of people though, it's like the opposite happens. And like, if your heart rate's elevated, maybe more than like 5 beats per minute above normal overnight, then that's probably an indicator of kind of, you need a little bit more recovery probably. But I think resting heart rate is great. That's my favorite kind of recovery indicator, I think.
Well, it's just so easy for people to get that information. Like you said, HRV, it's
Totally.
like, in theory, it sounds like a really cool thing to use, but it's like, it's just so hard to get that information. So it just becomes like worthless. Whereas, like, I feel like resting heart rate, I just have found that to be just so easy for clients to use. And like you said, most people have watches that and it just,
Mm-hmm.
it can be fairly accurate. Again, maybe it's off by just a tiny bit, but it's going to be fairly accurate. And I know for myself using it, like, anytime I am under recovered, like it's up, right? For example, like anytime, even if I have like a couple glasses of wine, next day I wake up, boom, it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's freaking way higher. So I know alcohol is one that definitely
Oh,
spikes
dude, the
that up.
alcohol, man, the alcohol. If I have alcohol close to bed, yeah, my heart rate will be like
It's
10 beats per
crazy.
minute higher overnight. It's insane. That's about the only one of the only consistent things that I can tell.
Which, hey, just goes to show, how much it does, it can impact recovery, even if you just have a little bit. So, um,
Absolutely.
cool. Yeah, no, that's all super helpful there. Great information on anything. Trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to hit on with that. Cool. Well, I think that sums that up. I guess the last thing I want to chat with you about here, just to be respectful of your time, we talked about this beforehand, is you don't have to necessarily go too in depth in every single one, but your 7 rules for health. I think this would be a good thing to end on, and then yeah.
Yeah, totally. This was like a post I did for my Substack, and it ended up being, I love like writing about the science, and I always think that people will be so interested in that. And then I'll write like just one random post on a weekend, and it'll be like my most popular one. So this one actually ended up being my most popular, and I think it's because maybe people found some value in it. So yeah, I was thinking about, like, and I say rules very lightly. It's things that I
Right.
try to do every day, or habits that I try to do every single day, um, that make me feel good. But I think that they are actually somewhat science based, and most of them kind of came from a research study or several research studies that I have kind of read and implemented in my life. So yeah, so my first one here, and we sort of touched upon this earlier, was I try to get 7,500 steps per day in addition to whatever exercise I'm doing. So not counting, say, like a run or a bike ride. The reason for that is because they've actually, I read a study or like a group of studies one time where basically they had people train for, I think it was like 6 to 8 weeks or something like that, or maybe even shorter than that. But essentially, if they reduced their step count while they were engaging in training, they didn't adapt as well to that exercise training as a group of people who were doing close to 7,500, and maybe it was closer to 8,000 steps per day. And so again, I think there's sometimes this misconception like, oh, well, I ran for 90 minutes today. I don't need to like get any more steps. That doesn't seem to be true. And it actually seems that if you're doing more steps, you're actually improving your adaptations to exercise. So I do aim for that. Like, I try to get, an hour a day basically of walking, 1 to 2, maybe 3 walks in addition to whatever exercise I'm doing. So that's kind of my one of my rules. These are in no particular order. Number two, we touched on this again. Wake up at the same time every day and keep a consistent-ish, bedtime. So bedtime can be kind of variable, depends on, how well your child's sleeping, or, if you have a date night, or if you have a later dinner, or if you're having work to do at the end of the night. But aim for kind of a consistent bedtime. So, within the same 90 minutes every night, and then wake up at the same time every day, which for me, that kind of varies. I try to keep it within 30 minutes. So it's anywhere between 4:45 and 5:15, just kind of depending on what that day looks like and what my workout schedule looks like. So wake up at the same time, and go to bed at the same time nearly every day. Number three, perform some type of strength exercise every single day. And, I was talking, maybe offline or about like what my strength training looked like. It's not very sexy. It's not very interesting. But every day I try to kind of do something. There's this idea, and this isn't my idea or my phrase, but like greasing the groove just to kind of like keep everything moving. So maybe I'll do sets of push-ups throughout the day. Maybe I'll do sets of pull-ups or some calf raises or some kettlebell swings like while I work. I try to do something like that every single day, in addition to maybe my more structured, formal strength training sessions. So that's something that I try to do. This number four is eat breakfast every day, or at least have some type of nutrition after my workout. I mentioned, I'm not really a huge breakfast eater. I don't like to eat like an enormous breakfast. I'm not typically hungry right after training, but I have found that doing like my protein and fruit smoothie just as kind of a bridge between my workout and lunch. I try to do that every single day, so that prevents kind of prolonging my fast a little bit too long after my workout. Number five, take an active relaxation break every day. So this could be in the form of a walk, but mostly I have an Aura ring, and within the ring they kind of have like these meditation sessions, like headspace sessions. I try to do one like 5 to 10 minute one of those every day. I'll just like go in the bedroom, lay on the floor, and just kind of do that. It's kind of like a reset. I find that that typically helps when I do it. So long as I don't fall asleep. Sometimes, I'd lay down to do that, and I'll wake up like 30 minutes later. I'm like, oh shit, I just like wasted my day, and now I have to spend the next 30 minutes trying to like wake up. So I try to do one of those every day. Um, Number six, I don't drink alcohol on the weekdays, so Monday through Thursday, and then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Or Friday and Saturday, I guess. I'm by no means a big drinker. I mean, especially as of late, like I maybe drink 3 drinks per week. So, I might have a beer if we go out to dinner on Friday. During the day, maybe on Saturday, we'll go to lunch or a brewery. I'll have maybe 2 to 3 drinks or something like that. That's pretty much the extent of it. And it's certainly not every week. So, Friday and Saturday are the days that I allow myself to drink alcohol. That doesn't mean I will drink, but it means that I can. And then Monday through Thursday are just simply no alcohol, in particular because I think if I'm going to drink, I prefer to do it during the day. It doesn't affect my sleep, like we kind of just said. And obviously during the weekdays, you can't really day drink because you have a job. And so the only time to drink is between like, 5 to 9, and that's pretty close to bed. So I don't like to do that. That changed especially since having a child, where I'm essentially just like, my sleep is already running the risk of being disrupted if he wakes up during the middle of the night. So I'm just not going to do anything that's going to compromise that. I need to be awake and alert when I wake up in the morning so I can get my workout done. So I just decided Monday through Thursday, no alcohol. And Friday, Saturday, if I want to drink, I do it. I don't do it on Sunday either because next Monday is like the work day. So that's kind of the rule that I do there regarding alcohol. But again, I do drink, moderately sometimes. I wouldn't even consider it probably moderately at this point. It's kind of light drinking. And then my final one, I wear an eye mask during sleep every night. We don't have the greatest blackout curtains in our room, and I was reading just some research on how even having like a nightlight on in your room at night can cause, even if they are minor, probably still significant disruptions in your sleep quality, even if they're imperceptible to you. So unless your room is perfectly dark, which is very rare for most people, I think that you should probably invest in a sleep mask. So I wear one of those at night. I've turned my wife onto it as well. She like can't sleep without hers, even some more so than me. She's like so reliant on it now. Like if she forgets it on a trip, she starts freaking out. So, but I love it. It has certainly improved like my sleep quality. It's kind of like a nice little ritual to. It's almost like a blanket like for your face, and so I use one of those every night. That's less so of a rule, maybe more so just like a little health tool I use. But yeah, so those are kind of my 7 rules, light rules for health.
Yeah, no, I like that you say like light rules, right? Because it's like, I mean, you gotta write it down and like, get people to read it, like, and read that stuff. So
Totally.
it's like rules that, that's a great way to say it. But like you said, light rules. As far as the like sleep mask goes, when our son was born a couple months ago, I bought a sleep mask to wear in the hospital at night. Man, that definitely is like super nice. And I think it's one of those things you mentioned your wife. Now she feels like you need it or she needs it. That definitely is one thing I feel like if you do start to focus on like your sleep quality and like really working on that, it's like once you start doing those things, it's like, man, you just like can't go back to how how you did it before. Like the way I sleep now compared to when I was younger, I'm like, man, I don't know how it makes sense why I never got, good sleep back in the day. So definitely think those eye masks are super helpful and awesome. So
Yeah, dude, for the hospital, oh my gosh. I mean, the lights are like on 24/7 in the
yeah,
hospital.
it's
They're like
crazy.
the hospitals are they're places of healing, but at the same time
Yeah.
they provide the absolute worst environment for healing to take place as possible. It's the biggest like oxymoron ever. So yeah, if you have to go stay in a hospital, bring your sleep mask and maybe some earplugs too.
In earplugs. But and you say that, and then obviously it's all about your wife and everything when she's giving birth and stuff like that. But
Sure,
man,
sure.
the sleep setup for the husbands, man, they really just kind of. I remember when we got there, it was like in the middle of the cot that I was supposed to sleep on, there was like a table. I'm like, are you freaking serious? How? But it's not about you, right? It's about them during that time. So
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Congratulations, by the way. It's yeah,
thank you.
that's a couple months ago. That's you're in the thick of it.
In the thick of it. Yeah, a couple nights the other night, 8 hours of sleep. Last
Oh
night
yeah.
from like 10 to 5:30. So I'll take it, man. Right? Any wins like that, you'll take at this point. So,
Yeah, for sure. Our guy's 18, almost 19 months now, and he's
congrats.
sleeping. I mean, gosh, he's sleeping like 12 hours a night. He sleeps from like 6:30 to almost 8 every morning.
That's
It's like it's a blessing.
that's awesome. It's like when you're in the thick of it, you're
Yeah,
like, man, I don't think I'm ever going to get out of this, but you eventually do, just like everything
it
else. So,
ends. It ends. Yep.
Brady, well, appreciate your time, man. This was a super awesome episode. Really enjoyed chatting with you. Before I let you go, is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to, or anything that you have coming out that you want to let the audience know about?
You mentioned my Substack, so I do write a weekly newsletter. I sometimes post more than once a week on there if I have something extra that I'm writing about, but that's physiologicallyspeaking.com. So people can go there, sign up for the newsletter. It is free. You have the option to pay if you want to support me, but that is free. On X, I am the letter B at underscore Holmer, like my last name. And that's kind of the only places where I'm active. I have a book that I wrote called VO2 Max Essentials. So if people are interested in learning more about like the science behind VO2 max, how to improve it, some other kind of interesting things about it. I do have it's on Amazon. So if you search VO2 max essentials, you can get the Kindle, you can get a hardcover, you can get a paperback. And then it's also available as like an ebook or a PDF download on Gumroad. I have the link somewhere in my bio on X that people can find it. So yeah, those are kind of the three things that I would point people to if they want to learn more about the work that I'm doing.
Well, yeah, we'll make sure we link those in the show notes so people have that. So again, Brady, really appreciate your time, man. We'll have to get you back on again in the future.
Yeah, totally, Jeff. I'd be down for round two anytime, and I appreciate you having me on today.